All right, we are back on Morning Line. Thanks for joining us, talking about the cancel culture that may be out there. We won't cancel you this morning. If you want to join in the conversation, 615-737-7587. If you want to give us a call, our guest this morning is Professor Larry Burriss from over at MTSU. Professor, you've been coming on this show for a while, haven't you? Did you come on at all with me sometimes when Larry Britton was here?
No, I don't think I was ever there with Larry.
That was a long time ago, but yeah,
a long time ago.
Well, it's good to see you again. It's always fun to talk to you, and wanted to get your take too. I assume, like a lot of other people, you've been at least paying some attention to the Senate trial right now of former President Trump on the impeachment, and I guess the House managers may wrap up their case possibly today, and then his lawyers will get a shot. And what I understand is their argument, part of it will be that what the president said was within his First Amendment rights and freedom of expression as he talked, and they're going to say that he did not spur them on to that riot or protest, whatever you want to call it. But what do you think about that type of argument going forward? And we know that a lot of what was out there was going out on Twitter, which is now a lifetime ban for the president.
Right. The president, any president, has First Amendment rights. They can say whatever they want to say about something. The issue is going to be, well, both sides are selecting their evidence. In the legal world, you start with a conclusion, then find your evidence to support it. And that's what both sides are going to be doing. The Democrats were showing pictures from the riots that I don't know had a direct connection, those particular scenes, with what the president had said. The Republican side, on the president's side, is going to highlight when the president told everybody to go home. They're going to highlight the idea that all he said was go march down to the Capitol, and we're already hearing the pushback to that. When I heard this morning, well, the president said go home, but he only said it one time. So again, there's going to be that kind of back and forth, and I think probably most members in the Senate have their minds already made up. And I really doubt that they're going to find 16 Republican senators to change sides and vote to convict.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right about that. And so I think if you were to ask those pushing ahead on this, it's not so much whether or not he's going to be convicted in the Senate, which would preclude him from running for, re-election in 4 years if he wanted to. But I mean, this is also, laying it out there for the American public now. You can decide what you believe, as well as for history. So there's more reasons for doing this. I'm curious, though, you hear the argument, the age-old argument about freedom of speech and First Amendment, and we all do have that. But there are lines that obviously need to be drawn, and the one they always talk about is yelling fire in a crowded movie theater. I mean, so and I know you are a real stickler for First Amendment rights all the way. I mean, how do you feel? And where's the line where you say, all right, you just stepped over it. That's no longer free speech. That's something that we can shut down or prosecute you for.
The Supreme Court has held that direct incitement to violence is not protected, and there are other areas of First Amendment that are not protected as well. So are we able to show that there was that former President Trump, directly incited the people who were there, again, without taking sides on it, and both sides have the right to say what they want. There apparently were people already at the Capitol building before he started to give his speech. There was already some planning being done to have some sort of direct action against the government. So whether or not the president incited that, the question is being asked, I think, is can you incite something that's already happening? And again, but both sides are selecting their evidence.
Yeah.
They're going to try to present either the best or worst. So I think that the public then should have access to all the different kinds of information. And I think that the public, fortunately, in our country, has a direct responsibility. If former President Trump wants to run again and the people say no, then he won't be able to run again. And in 2.5 or 3 years, he's going to have to start a campaign and he's going to run again. And if people reject his campaign, then the people have spoken. I tend to leave things up to the will of the people.
Let's take a phone call from Cindy. Cindy, good morning. Hi, Cindy.
Good morning, Nick.
Good morning.
What's that? Okay. Anyway, when people talk about climate change or about Nathan Bedford Forrest's thing that was named after him in Murfreesboro, well, or even the Capitol in Nashville, any of them, tear down the White House. Well, first of all, I look and I don't see one solar panel on any of them Congress's house or senators. Not one. And I look at all time because they got mansions. And number two, if you're going to pick on how Tennessee was founded in the South, and you gripe about, well, we want to dig his grave up. We're getting rid of his and his wife's grave, which they have done, because they were fighters for the South. And number three, the other thing I got to say, that canceling the culture or the history, you can't take it away from our hearts.
Okay, and she's referring to, I think, part of where you mentioned Nathan Bedford Forrest earlier, and that brings it up, and I guess that's part of the cancel culture. Yeah, your thought about that. I mean, people have different perspectives on Nathan Bedford Forrest, with the connection to the Klan, with the connection to the history of what it was. So when they talk about removing some, say, the bust from the state capitol, or some of these other statues that are in public places, what's your thought on that? Because it maybe is offensive to a large portion of the population. Is that reason enough?
There is not one public item out there that somebody is not going to find offensive. I bet there's nothing out there that somebody and some group is not going to find offensive. And where does that stop then? We end up canceling. You could eventually end up canceling everything. As we rename sports teams, for example, I'd be willing to bet that no matter what name you pick, somebody is going to find that offensive. And if they can get enough people together, then they're going to force another name change. And who are we going to be listening to? Everybody has a voice. Everybody needs to be able to say what they think. There was a film came out in the late 60s, early 70s, asking the question, is it always right to be right? So as we get more and more divisive, if we're going to rename a building, for example, then a group of people are going to rename the building. When we get another name, I'd be willing to bet that group is going to pretty soon split in half, because one half isn't going to like a particular name. So we rename the building again. Well, I'd be willing to bet again that group is going to split, because somebody in that group isn't going to like the name. And so where does that end? We end up in chaos, which is not the way to run a society.
But on the other hand, if you allow everything and anything to go, which I think's kind of what you're saying, I mean, I think that could create chaos, couldn't it, as well? I mean, there is nuance here, and I see what you're saying about you're always going to be able to find someone to object. But frankly, some of them sometimes that object to just obvious things are kooks. And you're going to be, Nick, why do you call someone a kook? Well, I'll tell you this. I understand why there is a segment of the population that objected to the Washington Redskins, okay? I can see that, the phrasing and what it meant to Native Americans. Now, if someone out there right now wants to come to me and start objecting because they don't like the Chicago Bears, because whatever, they don't think a bear should represent a football team, I'm sorry, I see a big difference. There's nuance there. I'm going to tell the one who says, I have a problem with the Bears to go jump in the lake. But I'm going to tell the population of people that says, I object to Redskin, I think that's legit. That's more direct. There's nuance here. Those two are not the same. The person objecting to the name Bears for Chicago and Redskins for Washington, to me, there's a big difference. And if you can't see that nuance, I think you're missing something.
What about the group, though, that wasn't offended by the name? But what about the group that saw the name as something to be proud of?
Well, it depends.
Are we going to listen to that?
Well, it depends. It's as though, if you have a name that is offensive to an entire segment of the population, I think that makes sense. It would be, for instance, in Germany, for them to erect a statue of Hitler. Okay, there may be some, lunatic Nazis out there that still respect Hitler, but for every Jew that sees that, that's offensive, and it should not be, period.
Sure. But in the case of sports teams, again, what about the groups that are not offended? What about the groups that, so when the Cleveland Indians were named, for example, there was input from Native Americans who said, yes, we approved this name. So 1 minute the name is okay, and the next minute the name's not. What about the groups that are not offended? Do they have a right to have their voice out there as well?
Would you believe then that those groups then would become offended if it was removed, is what you're saying?
Sure, absolutely. So what are we going to cater to the group that's offended by the name being removed? Why aren't we catering to that? And again, not dealing with any particular name. There are lots of instances where people are offended. Do we cater to those groups as well? So by way of example, there are television programs that have been removed because they are offensive. One of the most popular TV programs was A Big Bang Theory. And I've talked to lots of people who were offended by the anti-intellectual attacks in that program. Well, are we going to take that program off the air because this group or that group is offended? And how do we decide what is offensive enough? And again, when we have people who are not offended, should they not have a voice as well?
Let's take a phone call from Joe. Joe, good morning. Hi, Joe.
Good morning, Nick.
Morning.
Just listening to the people calling in and the professor. You might as well throw the Constitution in the trash can. You got guys like Mark Cuban has told his basketball team not to stand for the national anthem or anything. So he just decided himself that he don't care what the Constitution says, and he's got freedom of speech to tell his team to do that. You're never going to make everybody happy, but the Constitution, what Trump has done to the presidency and people like Mark Cuban and other people, you might as well just throw the Constitution away.
Well, let me ask you, Professor. I mean, he uses that example. Mark Cuban had issued a directive to his team not to play the national anthem before games. I think the NBA has stepped in with regard to that. But isn't that what the Constitution ensures? I would venture to guess that you would make the argument that whether an NFL player wants to take a knee, stand for the anthem or not, I think should be their choice. Just as Mark Cuban, if he's a private millionaire owner of the Dallas Mavericks, chooses not to want to play the national anthem, then he doesn't have to. And if you're a fan that objects to that, you don't have to buy tickets and go to his game.
Sure. A common misunderstanding here is that the First Amendment applies to the government. It says Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of speech and press. The Constitution says absolutely nothing about private industry.
Sure.
So that if Mark Cuban, as a private citizen, as the owner of a company, wants to make a statement for or against something, that is not a First Amendment issue. It may violate the spirit of the First Amendment, but the First Amendment only applies to government. So if Walmart wants to carry a particular CD, well, better example, if a movie theater doesn't want to show a movie, then go see the movie somewhere else. That's not a First Amendment issue. If the government says you can't see the movie, that's a First Amendment violation. So personally, I think you need to stand for the national anthem. There are many, many people died in order to protect the right for people to be stupid. And I'm a veteran.
Sure.
I think you should stand for the national anthem. If you don't, then you don't. And if enough people are upset, the people have a voice. If enough people are upset with what Mark Cuban is doing, don't go to the games.
Right.
There would be economic pressure brought to bear, and he would then relent. But it is not a First Amendment issue. First Amendment applies to Congress, to the government, not to private individuals, not to private companies.
I have another example we'll talk about with regard to First Amendment right to freedom of expression, but I thought you said that very well. We'll take a break, be back with some more calls and some more of our discussion about the cancel culture, First Amendment rights, and the like with Professor Larry Burriss right after this.